This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. How would Chicago have been different had Gery Chico defeated Tiny Dancer in 2011?
I supported him back then. I remember.
I supported him, too, against Tiny Dancer. I mean, it wasn't a close race. There was no runoff because Tiny Dancer got 55% of the vote because he was a tough little tyke who was going to come in town and make the tough decisions. Well, 7 years later, we realized, I realize that the rest of us now have gotten hip to the idea that was a big fraud. So 7 years later, does Gery Chico have a bit of I told you so to say? And what does he offer in the context of what has been wrought, not just in Tiny Dancer's 7 years, but all of the bills that have piled up for the last several generations that are coming due, like $1 billion spike in pension payments next year. Golly, I hope it's not what Dorothy Brown is suggesting.
Yeah, tell us again.
I mean, honestly.
She's the person that if you wore jeans to work on Friday, or you'd have to pay $3 on Fridays to wear jeans.
Well, how else is she going to raise campaign cash?
Yeah, she got in trouble for that.
She proposed a city lottery, also the sale of naming rights to government buildings. Including O'Hare and Midway.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Butch O'Hare
Butch
and
O'Hare,
family.
yeah. It's over.
Yeah.
We had a good run.
Yes. And O'Hare and Midway, Battle of Midway. Now we can, I don't know, name it for...
Pritzker? Pritzker Strip?
I don't know.
Oh, hey.
Madigan Getzendaner Airport.
It would be Madigan, because he has the government plane, right, or the governor's plane right there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options here. We have to look at creative ways of financing. What about a city-sponsored lottery? We probably contribute the most to the Illinois lottery, so why not have a city-sponsored lottery to bring those billions of dollars right here to help solve the pension crisis, said Dorothy Brown. Hey, buddy. I'm hoping that in addition to Paul Vallis, Gery Chico has ideas for the city that don't involve legalizing more drugs or expanding more gambling or coming up with new vices or current illegal activities to legalize for the purposes of revenue. But we'll find out because Gery Chico joins us now. Gery, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Sure. Good to be with you both.
So what about that first question as you reflect back on the last 7 years of Tiny Dancer's tenure and what could have been different had you won in 11? How do you answer that question, and how do you fast forward it to 2018?
Well, I think relations between City Hall and the communities would have been different, would have been a little better in the sense that my experience of having lived throughout the city, I think I have a feel for what makes these neighborhoods tick. We would have probably seen more development, more concentration on development in the neighborhoods. I think we would have had better relations with the police. I worked hard at that in my career. I'm ready to do that again. I mean, the relations between the police and the community are just not very good right now, and it's creating a whole lot of problems. And I think with regard to education, I think that our schools would have developed in all parts of the city with a more evenness of top quality programs. And we would have probably stemmed some of the flight that you're seeing taking place in Chicago, losing 10, 15,000 people a year. I mean, that's just my view of what could have been over the last 7 years. But, we're here now. We're here now. We have another opportunity to elect a mayor. I bring forth my experience again over many years of overseeing governments in Chicago, the city, the public schools, the park district, the city colleges, and even the State Board of Education, and my career as being a lawyer who owns a business. I think that what you do with that experience could help inform what you're likely to do if you're mayor. Remember now, Dan, we've got a whole list of people here running, and they're going to be talking about what they're going to do. And frankly, virtually none of them, except for Paul and me, have experience of having been at the helm of running the city, running the schools, running the parks, and running the community colleges. And I think that what that tells you is that what we say, we have some proof points in the past that we've done it, and therefore it's probably likely to happen. And that's going to be a big distinction in this race.
Well, you're a little late to the party. I mean, you jumped in after you found out that Mayor Emanuel was not going to seek re-election. Why didn't you,
Mhm.
if you had this desire and passion to be mayor of Chicago, why didn't you, throw your hat in the ring while he was still going to run?
Well, I mean, you have desire and passion, but at the same time, we're Chicagoans first. We're not candidates. And I love this city. And when Rahm Emanuel asked me to help bring in corporate sponsors for CPS STEM programs, I did it immediately. And I was just raised in a way when you're working with somebody on a project, you don't turn around and stab them in the back. That's why I didn't run at that time.
All right. You mentioned CPS, your tenure there as the board president. And this is a
Mhm.
question we put to Vallis as well. And frankly, it's staggering to me that it's not a bigger part of the conversation in the mayor's race. The sex abuse scandal in
Mhm.
CPS that has been reported upon by the Tribune and hopefully will continue to be reported upon. They'll continue digging.
Yes.
What can you speak to that from your time there, and what should be done to address that prospectively?
Fortunately, when I was at the Board of Education, we never had the scandal of this proportion. I'm not going to tell you that we didn't have people doing bad acts that we had to deal with, but let's face it. We're now on notice that this problem was prevalent. It was being covered up at the school level. It was not being handled well downtown when those complaints got there, and it's got to change. And I think that Frank Clark and Janice Jackson have begun by putting together a very tough system to review these complaints. The Inspector General is now involved with the situation, and I trust that you're not going to see this kind of abuse going forward. And we also have to remember we have to be sensible about these things. We can't have a law department that's settling cases and at the same time investigating them. That just doesn't work. It's a conflict of interest. But I think the light is on the problem now, and we're not going to see the level of this problem again.
What is your proposal for the budget deficit? Like
Well,
how are we going to become whole again? How are we going to stop spending money that we don't have?
well, the first thing we're going to do is grow the tax base. We need to have more development in this city. I'm very pleased to see that we have 4 or 5 major developments proposed for the city, and that's going to be a big boon to us. Also, I am not going to simply hit the tax pedal. And the citizens of this city, the businesses of this city, have been hit very, very hard. So I've proposed. I know you guys won't like this, but these are ideas that are alternate ways of forming revenue. I proposed back in 2011 casino gaming because I still think Chicago can be a very good host of a top quality program. And I've also marijuana is going to be legalized, whether you or I like it or not. It's coming. Michigan just approved it. The state of Illinois is going to approve it. Where is Chicago's piece of that? J.B. Pritzker says $700 million potential revenue. Where's Chicago's piece? I want the ability to impose a home roll tax on that activity so that we could maybe generate 150 million new dollars. When you come forward with ideas like that, whether it's casino gaming, whether it's a legalized pot, we're going to be in a better shape when we look at our taxpayers and we don't have to hit them as hard as we otherwise would have.
Hey, don't worry about me being opposed to a casino in Chicago. Worry about Ken Griffin being opposed to it. But I digress. Here's the thing. With respect to
Dan made a funny.
yeah, I'm a funny guy. With respect to that's talking a little bit about the revenue side, and I assume that's in lieu of going to the same well that Rahm went to, which is always increasing property taxes. Is that a fair assumption?
Sure. Have property taxes and other fees, whether it's television, water. Look, people can only take so much, and that's on top of other taxes that are about to come at us from the state.
Right. And so what about on the spend side, the size of the city workforce, the median salaries and benefits packages? I mean, how do you get out from underneath the unfunded obligations that not even a casino could keep up with?
And it's not just a casino and legalized gambling. We'll be bringing forward other ideas, too, and some of them won't take place overnight. Some you'll have to work through the legislature for a while. But I think we do have an opportunity now, Dan, to work with the legislature to get Chicago a little more help. When I was the state school board chairman, we started to write Senate Bill 1, which is the bill that altered funding for public schools in Illinois. And what happened there is Chicago and a lot of other districts around the state wound up getting lots of new money. In the case of Chicago, hundreds of millions of new dollars because we had such a large population of poverty and children with disabilities. I think You have to look to Springfield to forge new relations. You got to look at some of these alternative revenue sources. And make no mistake, cutting back on the size of government, doing things differently with technology and other efficiencies has got to be part of the program. That can't be left out. You just can't go year to year to year with the exact same size of government. And by the way, I should tell you, when I was chief of staff in Chicago in the 90s, and when you look at today, the personnel headcount of the city has gone down from about 44,000 into the mid-30s. Same thing with CPS. Why is that? Costs of running government, largely led by pensions, are not allowing you to have the same kind of money to hire the people that you need to perform the services.
That's right.
So we're being forced to come up with new ways to do business to serve the citizens.
Now, you mentioned being chief of staff to Rich Daley.
Yeah.
Why not fall in line with Bill Daley?
Who?
Well, I think Bill's a nice guy, but I don't think he's had the experience that I've had locally here over this many years. I mean, he chose to go to Washington, and that's fine. We respect that service. But it's not the same thing as hiring police, deploying police, working on community policing, building schools, making better school programs, building parks, overseeing swimming and athletic programs, and even overseeing the Chicago City colleges. Those are the things that the citizens of this city look for every day, work with every day, and I believe as mayor, my experience in the past will lead to a brighter future. You know, I'm an optimist. I believe our best days are ahead of us, and with the right leadership, we can realize that.
Now, I want to have you develop the police piece a little bit, because you mentioned that a couple of times. Obviously, it is a overriding issue with the endemic violence on the south and west sides of the city in particular, but not limited to those neighborhoods. And and so the one or two things you're going to do to restore the balance, number one, between City Hall and the police department, but number two, this feeling among rank and file police officers that the civilian political authorities have their back, which they clearly don't feel is the case now.
Well, look, I have the back of the police because we need them. We saw what happened tragically yesterday with Officer Jimenez being killed. I mean, look, can you imagine if the Chicago police were not on the scene immediately, what this gunman might have done walking through that hospital? I mean, we owe these people a debt of gratitude. On the other hand, there's always some bad apples in a large population, and we've seen that too. We have to bring balance back to respect for the police and the police having respect for the community. When I was in the mayor's office in the early 90s, we instituted community policing, which forced dialogue at the beat level between the police officers and the community. That has kind of slipped. It's got to come back powerfully. But at the same time, a lot of these communities haven't been touched in 50 years. Take the west side of Chicago. After the west side of Chicago burned with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, we haven't built anything there in 50, 60 years. It's unacceptable. We have to go back and build communities, so we force these gangs out of there. When we don't have activity in neighborhoods, gangs come in, the drug sales take place, the guns come in because you got to protect your turf, and they start to recruit our kids. You start to build neighborhoods, and you bring in some activities, whether it's business, schools, parks, like we've done before. We'll crowd these guys right out of here, and they won't have the chance to get the foothold that they have. And when you have that, when you have economic activity that's positive, you don't have all these elements of crime, poverty, and despair.
Now, let me, I want to ask you this question about this piece that Jeff Carter, who's one of the co-founders of the Hyde Park Angels, venture capital play there, wrote in his blog last week. We talked about it in this show. I talked about City Club yesterday, too. The point of why we lost HQ2 and why the city has problems that other big cities don't have. He talked about this closed network. Look at who was tasked with putting together the proposal to bring HQ2 to Chicago. It's the same 600 people. Chicago is a closed network, whether it's our politics, whether it's venture capital, whether it's education reform, this closed network of the same people who are all interconnected. And guess what? The problem with closed networks is they crowd out innovation. They're not receptive to new ideas or new people, so they can't change. And to be fair, you're part of that inside network. So how do you, if you believe that premise, open up this closed network that really afflicts the city and the state?
Well, the change is going to come from somebody who's in the network who realizes what you just said. The real power comes from a lot of different ideas from a lot of different sources, which is why last Friday evening I sat with about 15 African-American business owners on the south side of Chicago to get their ideas about what we need to drive this city forward. It's the same thing that I learned when I spent an entire afternoon with the Muslim community in different parts of the city, wanting to hear what they could bring to the conversation. Look, we have to realize that the best ideas and the best thinking come from larger groups, not smaller groups. You won't see my administration talking to 10 people and that's it. I don't think that's smart business, and I don't think it's our path forward.
He is Gery Chico. He's a candidate for mayor of Chicago. Gary, the website for people who want to get more information on your candidacy.
ChicoForMayor.com, and I want to wish you and Amy and all your listeners a happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.